Welcome to Abbotsford House. We're standing outside the main entrance to the house, and unlike most Georgian country houses, the first thing you come to is a big barred gate. It's symptomatic of the fact Walter Scott's gardens are very different from the gardens of most Georgian houses, which are laid out for show. Walter Scott's not really doing that. He's taking elements of Renaissance gardens, specifically Renaissance Scottish gardens, and blending it with some very, very contemporary features. So the gardens are a bit like the house. They look old, but they've got a lot of very modern features. And one of the things he's doing, which is in the Scottish Renaissance tradition, is he's using outside space as, if you like, external rooms for the house. So here we are in what you can think of as the reception court, the main court outside the front door of Abbotsford House. And there are 3 consecutive courts running south from here. And that feature is reminiscent of Scottish Renaissance castles and houses. Often the external spaces are broken up into, if you like, working areas, planting areas for different types of growing. So there's a kitchen garden as one of the 3 courts. There's what was the ornamental plant garden, and then there is the external court outside the front of the house. But it also had a lot of features that were of interest. So Walter Scott is really using this as an external space from the house, and a space to make people who visit him think and stimulate conversation. What you see now is very, very different from what we see on Walter Scott's day. The 2 walls there had a cast iron arcade running along them, which had honeysuckle, scrambling roses, very, very highly scented plants growing along them. Sculpturing in the wall. Some of that goes back to the early days of the Roman conquest of Britain. There are some features from classical Europe, Roman and Greek features. There are some from India as well. So there's a variety of artifacts set in the wall which stimulate conversation and are part of Walter Scott's collection in the same way that the collections inside the house are. Just as Walter Scott used a lot of very new materials and techniques in the house, he did the same out in the garden as well. So there's a cast iron arcade behind me. There was also cast iron grills in all these archways there to my right, which have got design features on them on the stone that match features inside the house. But the cast iron grill was more or less continuous, but not coarse, really quite fine. So it closed in. The 4th side was closed in this bit of the garden. So again, you've got a sense of a room. We are in what's now often referred to as the sunken garden, but it wasn't really designed to be thought of in that way. This was the main formal garden area of the house, and you look at it now and you think, oh, it's a bit plain, isn't it? But in Walter Scott's day, it was totally, totally different. There was a path ran through here, joining the kitchen garden to the court in front of the house. And the garden to this side was totally different stylistically to the garden on this side. And it reflected the ambience between the Gothic and Romantic nature of the time and the classical and formal and logical and rational time. So Scott was building a tension in. So this side was planted up with conifers, shrubs. There was a tomb. There was a sundial, and on it was written, "Night follows day." And on this side, there were really much more formal flower beds with, in some cases, really quite exotic and unusual striking plants. Walter Scott had a lot of connections abroad and also with the botanical community up in Edinburgh. His uncle was in charge of the botanical gardens in Edinburgh. And so he got access to a lot of interesting seeds and plants. And he grew them here. Behind here there was the vinery, there was a heated greenhouse. There was heating in the walls running around the bottom end of the kitchen garden as well. And so they could grow really quite sensitive plants out here. We know he had plant catalogues, and we have some idea of the plants he planted, but we don't know in detail what kind of plants were in the garden here. So we're outside the far wall of the kitchen garden, and the reason we've just come up here is to point out that these were heated walls. You'll see some stone markings where there's been ducting in the wall. And so this was really an area where Walter Scott could grow food for the house. There was also a lot of flowers growing in here as well, because a lot of flowers in the house. We'll just go on through here. So in many respects this is a very typical Victorian walled garden, broken into 4 sections with a central path down the way and then a central path running across it. And the central path across it had fruit trees on it, and we still have fruit trees growing on that section. And the 4 different quadrants of the garden were used on a rotation basis. But you see now there's a lot of flowers in it, and there was always a lot of flowers in it because Walter Scott and his wife both loved flowers. And one of the things about the garden at Abbotsford is Walter Scott used it as almost part of his own personal therapy. He had bouts of depression, and he realised that actually working outside in the garden, carrying out physical work, helped relieve the depression. And both he and Lady Scott planted hundreds, if not thousands, of trees. You look round Abbotsford now and you see trees all round the area. When Walter Scott built this house, there were virtually no trees here. The Scottish Borders was almost denuded of trees, and he was part of that great tree planting effort. But he also realised that the garden gave him peace of mind, and that is actually reflected in some of the other things that are still in the garden, such as the herb garden, which is just over here. So here we are over beside the herb garden, which was just planted in the last couple of years as part of a community project, but there are some really quite unusual herbs in it, and that takes us back to the days when it was the kitchen garden as well. I mean, herbs are for medicinal and culinary purposes. Even after Walter Scott's time, the garden remained very important as part of the house. And the last family members who lived here, the 2 sisters, they were both keen gardeners. And one of the last photographs we have of the 2 of them is them sitting out in the garden. So when you come to Abbotsford, it's not really about plants, it's more about garden design and how it fitted into the development of taste at the time, and also with Walter Scott's point of view about the therapeutic nature of gardens and outside space. So it might not be what you expect as a garden, but there's an awful lot to learn in the garden.